Ultraman Towards the Future, or Ultraman Defender of the Universe, was a 13-episode series produced by Tsuburaya Productions. To many, Ultraman is recognized as a property home to Asia, with its first series dating all the way back to the late 60s. But in 1990, a new series was filmed and set entirely in Australia, making it the very first and most expensive English-speaking Ultraman series. I imagine many of you have at least seen or recognized some of these toys put out by DreamWorks representing this series, but you might not be familiar with the actual story itself these figures tie into. While filmed in 1990, this series was actually debuted to North American audiences in 1992. Speaking to personal experience, this show ran early mornings on Sunday, so my mom taped most of the episodes for me. Sadly, at the making of this video, there doesn't seem to exist an official DVD Blu-ray release of the series apart from bootlegs. There are, however, VHS releases, which are typically quite difficult to track down. It took me several years to complete a set of 13 of these, as someone thought it was a good idea to release only one 24-minute episode per tape. Thankfully, this series can be streamed on YouTube and other online platforms as far as I've seen. Now, before we get into the toys, here's just a brief synopsis of the storyline to help paint a picture for those unfamiliar. We join our main character, Jack Shindo, a member of the government agency UMA, standing for Universal Multipurpose Agency, as he takes part in a research mission on Mars. He's quickly approached by the series' main villain, Gudis, some kind of alien parasite. It's then that a giant metallic being, soon after revealed to be Ultraman Great, jumps on screen to defend Jack. Gudis ends up wrecking Jack's ship, stranding him on Mars, but during the fight, he sees his demise and ultimately dematerializes into some form of bacteria that heads out to invade Earth. Realizing Jack would be left for dead without a ship, it's decided that Ultraman and Jack should merge their life forces together. Bluntly put, they are now one and Jack can turn into Ultraman. They return to Earth and rejoin UMA, vigilantly awaiting Gudis' next attack. And with all that unnecessary perspective, here's the toy line. You can see that the main larger figures all scale to around the 8 to 9 inch mark. They're all hollow vinyl figures with moving appendages. No crazy action features or anything special. They're pretty lightweight with a lot of give to them. You have the crown jewel of the collection, Ultraman Great. No complaints other than he's a little difficult to stand up at times. It's also getting harder to find one of these without excessive paint scuffs. Keeping in mind that these were figures intended to battle and be smashed together, it's no surprise the conditions you find them in today. Now, there have been many different Ultramen before this guy, and a lot of them look very similar. One of the most identifiable differences is the triangular shape of this timer on his chest. Think you'd never notice it? Well, thankfully the show's narrator informs you every single episode that Ultraman's power runs out after 3 minutes, as indicated by the flashing timer.
Because of Earth's polluted atmosphere, Ultraman can only retain his gigantic form for 3 minutes. Time is running out. Time is running out. Time is running out.
Apparently he can't hang in this atmosphere due to how polluted it is. Either he gets it done in 180 seconds, or that's it. Many of the enemies featured in the show were innocent creatures infected or affected in some way by the Gudis dust that floated to Earth. Kilazee was the first monster I added to my collection as a kid. I won't go into convoluted detail about how he works into the series, but he's one of the last monsters Ultraman has to take down. If you include his horn, he stands as the tallest figure in the line. His colors and dragon-like appearance make this guy very appealing. I should also note that the figure was originally packaged with his wings on opposite sides of where they currently sit. They look too closed off and folded back, so take a hairdryer, heat up the joints, and swap them around for a more dynamic and open appearance. Obviously, do this at your own risk, as these are vintage figures. Bogen, a Gudis-infected tadpole, is the first monster Ultraman fights. Just looking at him, there isn't much going on as far as posability, but he's a good representation of what we saw in the show. He kinda just plops his dumpy self down in the middle of the city, so not much can be expected from him in a figure form. Fun fact to note, you can actually see this figure, as well as Ultraman, as set dressings in the background of the Nickelodeon show, The Adventures of Pete and Pete, Season 1, Episode 8. You can also see their pack-in decals. I should probably mention that every figure in the line had one as well. Majaba is a mutated grasshopper appearing in the 8th episode of the series. Truthfully, he's one of my favorites with his bug eyes, mandibles, and multiple arms. Unfortunately, he's flawed in his stance. His tail's directed downward and can't be flipped up. This forces him to be hunched over and almost completely face the ground. Still fine for play, but not great when you want to actually display him. Varangas was a poison gas monster appearing in episode 5. Sadly, he's my least favorite, and the only one I didn't pick up when I was a kid. He's mainly supposed to walk on all fours, although he's seen in the show to stand up on his hind legs for a time. I don't know. His figure doesn't seem intimidating, especially considering Ultraman simply towers over him with inches to spare. Those things on his back are supposed to be wings that emit poisonous smog, but I think they look clunky and don't appear to be at all organic. He's rough, but I still like him. Garukadon, appearing in episode 3, was the 5th and final monster released. He's one of the largest in the line, which is interesting. I would have guessed him to be one of the smallest considering his show appearance. He spends mostly all of his time gliding in the air, and interestingly enough, he's one of the only monsters not to have been operated by a suit actor, but as a standalone puppet. With all that said, I think he's the figure you want if you're only picking up one monster figure for Ultraman. He looks great and appears very imposing next to him. In hindsight, DreamWorks probably should have stopped there with those 6 figures, but they did produce a small, and I mean minuscule, batch of human figures. Jack Shindo comes as a pack-in with the Ultraman figure. He comes in 2 random varieties, one in a red suit and one in blue. I don't think either one is more uncommon than the other. They also come with matching sidearms to hopelessly point at the giant monsters. And right here we can see our first scaling issue. This line's infamous for its mismatched sizes, so there's more to come. The human figures stand around a third of the height of these 8 to 9 inch figures. Okay, I mean these monsters are supposed to be flattening skyscrapers and destroying cities, but whatever. Even as it is, I can look past it. The only other posable human figure offered in this line is identified as Morgan the fighter pilot, released with the line's only vehicle, the Defense Fighter Jet Hummer. Pop open the canopy, lay him down, and you'd never know he was in there. I have to admit though, I like this vehicle for a number of reasons. It displays nicely sitting on its landing gear as indicated by the back of its box, even though it's just molded plastic and not wheels. Oh well. A nice feature it has is this fold-out handle for kids to better simulate flight for play. It also aligns with a trigger that satisfyingly discharges a net for monster catching attempts. Here we go though, the scaling is just terrible. It's so humongous. One of the best visuals I can offer is this shot of Ultraman in the show cradling one of the Hummers in the palm of his hands. Okay, still, I'll look past it. Some of the boxes picture another vehicle called Saltop, which can also be seen in the show. Sadly, was never produced. The very last item released, as any respectable action figure line would have, was a playset, the Clash and Thrash City. Oddly enough, this was strangely released by Bandai and not DreamWorks. I'll be completely honest and say that this was one of my favorite playsets as a kid. Obviously, you can see it's a giant city that can be set up and destroyed by these monsters, but I definitely used it for other toys like Power Rangers. The buildings can be collapsed, the power lines can be destroyed, and the vehicles can be crushed. Lots of good stuff going on. Where it begins to lose me lies with this pack-in UMA squad. They're all molded in one solid color with no articulation, so standing Jack and Morgan next to them looks ridiculous. It's difficult for me to write them off though because they appear to represent actual characters from the show. So these lifeless statues end up filling out some of the holes in your team, and it's sad. They try to make up for it by providing you with a disc launcher that admittedly fires satisfyingly hard. Check out the awesome box art though. You've got the team stationed on top of a building, placing themselves in harm's way and desperately firing into the action. Oh boy, here we go, can't even get close to that. The scaling is just brutal and so apparent with this set more than anything else. Abysmal. Just get these human figures out of here and you're left with a pretty cohesive line of figures. In summation, I know this toy line, let alone the television series, isn't for everyone, but it's admittedly eye-catching in appearance. If you're not into B-tier sci-fi or lack nostalgia for this, then it's an easy pass and I don't recommend it. If you like it, then you're in luck as these figures are still pretty common online, and as of this video, everything can be acquired at a decent price if you're patient. Also interesting to note is that a second series of figures were slated for release, including a more fleshed out UMA team and a much more posable Ultraman figure. Unfortunately, the line was scrapped and we were left with only the figures I've shown you. I'd love for this particular 13 episode series to be revived or updated in some way, either through the toys or the show itself, but I imagine it'll stay right where it is, at least for a while. If you like this toy line overview, please consider subscribing to the channel, and also be sure to check out our podcast. Just search Toy Talk Guys in your podcast app of choice, or click on one of our links in the video description below. Thanks for watching.